exercises you can do to turn on the hip extensor. So we're talking about the glute and the hamstrings, even a little bit of the abdominal complex, because all of these muscles need to work together to create good alignment, good pelvic alignment, to decrease the anterior pelvic tilt and to help alleviate back pain, okay? So the first thing is it's simply a bridge. You probably know this exercise already, but again, it's like I said in the last video, a lot of times we're just going through the motions, right? Do this exercise, it works your hips. Well, we assume that it's targeting the right muscles, but how do you know? Because a lot of times, let me explain it this way. If you can't turn on your glutes and hamstrings, if they're inhibited, then how can you assume that just because you're doing a certain exercise, it's turning them on? So you can't assume that the exercise is automatically getting it. You got to kind of think it, and you got to focus into it to make sure that you're getting the right recruitment. So really quickly, just some pointers when you do the bridge. Have your feet about shoulder about hip width apart, maybe shoulder width apart at the most. Make sure your toes are pointed straight ahead. Do not point your toes out to the sides like that. Point them straight ahead, okay? Arms out to the sides, palms up, and then all you're going to do is you want to do a couple things. One, press your shoulder blades into the floor, but don't lift your lower back to do it. So the way you kind of do this is think of squeezing your shoulder blades, like pinching the floor. Like if I'm laying on the carpet here, I imagine that I'm pinching the carpet between my shoulder blades, and I hold that tension there. From there, you extend the hips all the way up, and what your ideal is imagining a straight line going through your shoulder, your hip, and your knee. Just a straight line. So when you come up, if you have tight hip flexors, typically your hips will stop moving and your chest will come up. And what will happen is you'll feel it in your lower back. So if you're feeling this exercise in your lower back, you're doing something wrong. The feeling you should have is your glutes primarily, and then your hamstrings work together. Right? A lot of tension in the glutes, you should feel it, and then secondary in the hamstrings. If you get hamstring cramps, you're overly recruiting the hamstrings because your glutes aren't firing. Okay? And you really shouldn't feel your thigh muscles do anything because you're not extending the knees, right? It's not a knee extension. So hamstrings should be, or quadriceps should be quiet too. If they're not, again, there's some issues in there. Stretch the hip flexors out, stretch the quads out, and then repeat it, all right? And then just practice it. And a lot of times this takes time to get it to work because you have muscles that haven't been turning on for so long, and sometimes they just don't respond right away. So we have to just keep working with it, okay? What you can do then is you can progress the bridge. You can progress it to laying on your back on a stability ball, like one of these guys. You just lay on your back on it and then go up and down with it. It adds a little bit of instability to it and challenges the muscles of the hips to stabilize your hips a little bit more, stabilize your trunk a little bit more, and also to work under a little bit more challenging conditions. Okay, so we're going to have our kneeling pulling patterns now, and I've got my band hooked up here. So I'll show you any cable attachment. You can use a resistance band like I'm using here, and basically we're looking for a pulling pattern. So this is going to be a little bit different because, again, what we're trying to do is now we're starting to add some upper body movement within pulling patterns that we use in our everyday lives. So we want to be able to move and use these types of patterns with an ideal stabilization of the hip, right? We want to decrease that anterior pelvic tilt, shut down that lower back. So this is where we start to integrate a little bit. Now you can pull two ways. You can pull from front to back like I'm going to do here. So it's just having your cable rigged up, ready to go. And then what you're going to look to do is you're going to be kneeling. The reason why you want to kneel down is because you can extend the hips. You can't do this when you're sitting on a bench because you're sitting in a position where your hips are flexed. So it's hip extension. You're going to consciously tighten up the glutes, tighten up your abdominal muscles, and then you're working through the pulling pattern, okay? And you want to keep that hip extension. You want to make sure you're not sitting back into the row because it's going to reinforce the anterior pelvic tilt, right? Keep the hips extended and pull, okay? And then just work through. And you should feel glutes working, a little bit of hamstrings working, but no cramping down there, but a lot of glutes and a lot of abdominal complex. Again, you can do two ways. You can do front to back rowing. you can do like lat pull down, high to low rowing. Okay, just get a cable rigged up high like a lat pull down machine and work, and you can work ranges in between. All right. So that is your kneeling. So let's go through another one. Another posterior chain exercise we're going to look at is the straight leg deadlift. So this kind of follows suit with squat. Oh, and I should teach the squat while I'm on this as well, since I've been talking about it so much. Straight leg deadlift is, I'm just going to use the dowel for a weight here, but basically, we're looking at doing the same thing here. We are looking at, a lot of times I see people go into this and just kind of do straight leg deadlifts and really focusing on the hamstrings, but, a lot of times they're feeling the lower back, they're pulling excessively with the back, and the glutes aren't doing a whole lot. So we've got to make sure that the glutes are working with the hamstrings, otherwise we get problems as well. Okay, so as you go into the straight leg deadlift, you want to make sure that you're actively driving your bottom back. That means that you're not just bending at the waist, you're not just shoving things around and pulling with the back. You're actively just driving the hips back. And in this position, when you do that, you should immediately feel the abdominal muscles turn on. So that's number one. You've got to get those abdominal muscles to help stabilize the pelvic rotation, because you're going into an anterior tilt, but you don't want it to be excessive. And if the abdominals don't contract, then you're going to create a lot of pressure on the spine, okay? So you get those abdominals get them engaged by driving the hips back. Then you just kind of let the bar or dumbbells or whatever you're using drop down. You just let them glide down. Now you're actively recruiting the glutes. You're keeping the stomach on. You're actively tightening those glutes and actively extending your hips as you come up. And there's a difference with that. When you're focused on extending the hips, you're not going to be pulling with the lower back. So there's a difference with me extending my hips versus me pulling with my lower back, right? Big difference. So that's what you want to be doing on the straight leg deadlift. On the squat, basically, it's a similar concept. On the squat, you can do arms out and basically go with body weight. Because if you can't do a body weight squat with the right muscles involved, then why are you going to add any kind of loading like medicine balls, dumbbells, bands, barbells, things like that. So just go with a typical straight arms forward squat and work on the cueing pattern. Abdominal muscles engaged, thinking about keeping those glute hamstrings on at the top. If you squeeze them tight up here, you feel them. Then what you're going to do is you're going to let your hips go down and back into an anterior tilt, but with the thought of keeping the glute hamstrings contracted. It's tricky to do because when a muscle gets longer, it's harder to keep the contraction there. So a lot of times what happens is you get it up here, but you come down and and you feel like you lose it. So that's where you got to go. So you can progressively work with depth. Quarter squats, just here to here, until you can keep the glute and hamstrings on. All right? Then progress it to half depth. Make sure that you can keep those muscles on all the way. And then you can go to your 90 degree or wherever you want to go on your squat. Okay? So that is your squat pattern. And then there's one more exercise I'm going to show you that's kind of a lead-in to a squat pattern or any posterior chain exercise. So we're going to be back on the floor for the next one. So for a kneeling back extension, ideally what you would do is you can get an aerobic step or a small kind of bench or something here. An aerobic step is really good because it'll help you have a contact point when you're coming down in here. So basically this is just, it's a lead-in to your posterior chain exercises. Again, it kind of primes the right muscles to work for you. So what we're looking at here is basically there's two ways you can do this. You're going to be up on your knees, arms in front of you. This is basically a modified position. Keep your glutes tight, okay? And then what you're trying to do is when you come back, again, it's like straight leg deadlift. You're going to drive your hips back, but you really want to feel the abdominal muscle contracting. Make sure the abdominals are working, and then all you're doing is going fingertips to the floor, using the glutes and keeping your abs tight to extend your hips. All right? It looks easy when you watch it here. You might be thinking, oh my God, I'm not even going to do that. Let me tell you something. Stop this video right now and try it. And I guarantee it's a lot harder than it looks when you're using the right muscles. If you're just doing this and going through, just kind of blowing through it and going through the motions, right, it'll be easy. Anything's easy when you do that. Focus, concentrate, and move like I'm doing, slow and controlled with it, and feel for those right muscles. You'd be amazed how hard it is. Once you can do that, progress to hands on the side of the head, and then go through it here. All right, and then you just basically go as far as you can, and then come right back up by extending the hips with the glute and hamstrings, keeping the stomach tight. So when you have a step in front of you, you can modify it as high as you need, okay? Now the further down you go, at a certain point, when you get back far enough, your hips won't move anymore. So that if you were to go further down, like from here, you'll see my back will just start to round out the further down I go, because there's no movement at the hips. So then what starts to happen is it becomes a lower back strengthening exercise from here all the way until you can get up to here where your hips can come up under you and move. Now that could be good or bad. And in most cases with lower back pain that I've seen, if you've got overused or low back muscles that you're overusing, the lumbar extensors, if they're tight, the last thing you need is to strengthen them. And that's what happens is I see a lot of people being told that their lower back muscles need to be strengthened. And they do lower back strengthening exercises like that and sitting on machines doing back extensions, and they wonder why their back pain is getting worse. So be very careful. In most cases, I wouldn't do that unless you absolutely 100% know that you have weakness in the lower back muscles and your lower back needs to be strengthened. All right, now would be a case where you see a decreased lumbar curvature. That would be something where you'd need an extension-based exercise like that. Otherwise, if you have anterior pelvic tilt, excessive anterior pelvic tilt, tight hip flexors, don't go past the point where your hips stop moving. You don't need a whole lot of movement on this exercise, okay? So those are your 4 exercises. And that brings us to the end of this video series, and I really hope that this has helped you out and given you a lot of feedback and information that you can use. And as usual, I want to know how it's working for you. So I want you to try all these out, everything from the assessments to the exercises. And even looking at issues in your life revolving around stress that I talked about in the second video, hugely important. And let me know how it's working for you. Let me know if it's working for you. Let me know if you have any other questions that come up, related to this, or maybe it's some other areas of injury or pain that you're dealing with. And I'll do my best to help you out. But until then, enjoy the exercises. Hope you enjoyed the series, and I'll talk to you soon.